Hey, gang, it's Mr. Cassidy and my friend Mr. Bones in the storage closet here at Jefferson with another episode of Science Vids. This week we're talking about how plants migrate. And you might say, what? Plants migrate? I thought only animals migrated. And we talked about that last time with salmon and birds and whales going on those big journeys where they start in one spot and end up in the same spot at the end. Well, plants migrating, it's a little bit different. Plants produce seeds and fruit and stuff like that. And those seeds and fruit go from where they started on the tree or the bush or the flower, and they just go one direction. They just go to a new spot and start growing in that new place. And in that way, the plant, its range expands. You know, it starts in one spot, but then through its seeds and fruits, it goes to all these different places. And it gets those different places through a couple of different ways. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Everybody's picked a dandelion, brought it up to your face and blown it, and you've seen the seeds go everywhere. And if it's a windy day, those seeds will go high into the sky and travel for miles and miles. And that's a way that plants can get their seeds to new locations, is through wind dispersal, is what it's called. Here's fireweed. That's a really pretty flower that does the same thing as the dandelion. It has really light seeds. If you look at them, they're kind of built like little helicopters. Like if you look at a dandelion seed, it's got one piece that comes down, and then all these little pieces around the top. Looks like a little helicopter, and it kind of functions like a helicopter. It catches a little bit of wind and it floats off, and can travel for hundreds of miles if it catches a good wind current. And in that way, the plant explores new areas and grows in new areas. Uh, Another way that plants can migrate is by cloning. Okay, so this plant over here is called chick and hens, and chicken hens, you'll see it in people's gardens. You can buy it. You can buy them like at Walmart or plant stores or whatever. They're super popular plant in people's homes. Um, Basically, these big pieces of the plant are called those are the hens. Those are like the mama hens, and they just bud out. They just like produce these little teeny pieces that just pop out and start growing at the base of the mama, and those are the chicks. That's why it's called chicken hens, because there's these big pieces that are the mamas and these little pieces growing at the bottom that are the babies or the chicks. And the mamas basically just clone themselves. They make the same exact genetic copy of themselves, and then they just bloop, like a little piece of them just falls off, and that new piece starts growing in a new spot. And then over time, say the plant starts like this, some more chicks get made. Those chicks grow up and turn into hens. They drop chicks, and in that way, the plant keeps growing and growing and growing until it can cover this huge distance. Um, yeah, actually, the biggest organism in the world is a series of cloned quaking aspen trees. That's down in Oregon. It covers like 5 miles, and it's all just one tree technically, even though it has got a bunch of different trunks. It's uh, it's a tree that started off as one single stalk, and then over time it produced all these different trunks, and now it's like it covers this whole entire mountain. It's the biggest organism in the world. It's pretty awesome. Okay, another way that seeds get around is by being really sticky. I'm sure everybody's like walked through a field and you get all these sticky little balls on your socks or your shoelaces or your pants, and you try to pick them off. It's just super annoying. They're hard to get off. Those seeds are called burrs. And burrs, they're just like little pieces of Velcro almost that stick to your clothes. Here's some over here. This person got a bunch stuck on their sweater. And then there's that same seed all broken open. And well, so technically it's the fruit is the whole burr. And then you crack them open and there's the seed inside. And in that way, the seed has caught a ride basically on this person's arm. And then at some point it's going to get, brushed off or fall off, and then the seed's going to be in a new spot. And here's a deer over here. It's covered in seeds, covered in sticky seeds, all those little things hanging off its fur. It brushed across the plant. The plant um, let go of its seeds, and it attached to the deer. And the deer ran off, went to a new spot. The seeds eventually fall off, and they're in a new place to grow. The plant has migrated. Okay, another tactic, another strategy that plants have is to make really delicious fruit that animals want to eat, Animals eat that fruit, and inside that fruit are seeds. And when a animal goes and poops that fruit out, the seeds are in a new location, and the plant has successfully migrated to a new location. And not only is it in a new spot, it's covered in poop, and poop is fertilizer. Plants really like fertilizer to grow, and so poop is a great fertilizer. And so here's a giant bear turd. This bear's been eating like blackberries and raspberries, it looks like. Over here, it's eating a bunch of apples. And yeah, I mean, if you wander around the woods, especially in the late summer or early fall, you'll see tons of bear poop that's mostly just berries. Like near the end of the summer, bears are pretty much just eating berries exclusively. That's all they're eating. And so they'll make these massive poops that are like, as big as my head. And it's just all berries and stems and leaves. It's pretty cool. Okay. Here's a question for you. How did plants get way out into the middle of the ocean? Here's Hawaii, this little circle out here in the middle of nowhere. How did plants make it all the way out there? I guess if you're a dandelion seed, you could possibly get blown like 3,000 miles out in the middle of the ocean and then settle down on this little teeny rock in the middle of nowhere. That could happen. But like Hawaii and all these other islands out here in the Pacific, they're covered in fruit trees and fruit shrubs and stuff. How did those fruit shrubs get out there before humans started traveling out there and brought their own food? Before humans showed up, there was fruit trees out there and shrubs and berry bushes. How did those get out there? It wasn't a bear that just like held a poop in its tummy for like 3,000 miles as it swam from, Alaska down to Hawaii, or a deer that did the same thing, held a poop in its stomach for 3,000 miles. That's impossible. How'd they do it? Anybody have any guesses? Bird poop. That's right. Bird poop. Here's an awesome photograph of a bird pooping. Almost looks like a little seed right there. I don't know if you can see that. So birds travel all around. But yeah, hypothetically, birds ate some berries or seeds, like in, say, if we're talking about Hawaii, maybe they ate them like in Russia up here. And then they were going to fly over here, but a big storm hit them and they got taken all the way down to the south. And they saw this little chunk of rock through the storm, and they landed on it, and it was Hawaii, and it took a poop of relief, and in that poop was a seed of a berry bush, and that berry bush seed had a new place to grow, and it was surrounded by fertilizer and volcanic rock, and in that way Hawaii got a new plant. And I think over time, after all these birds traveled thousands of miles with basically seeds and berries in their guts, that birds helped populate the Hawaiian Islands with plants. How about that? Pretty wild. Okay, this is a really cool story too. The story of the mesquite and the cow. So a lot of plants have this relationship where they need an animal's guts to basically scar the outside of the seed, and that activates the seed. It tells the seed it's time to grow because it's passed through the guts of a cow or a buffalo or a giant sloth. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so here's some cows eating this mesquite bean, these beautiful long beans in a pod that grows from the mesquite tree down in the desert. And so the cow eats the mesquite bean, passes through its guts. The guts jostle it all around, and it gets all scarred, and tells the seed that it's time to grow. It's been activated. And then the cow poops it out. The seed's surrounded by fertilizer. It's been all scarred. It's been activated, and it starts to grow. And yeah, a bunch of plants utilize this same animal relationship. Another way that these mesquite bean pods can get activated is through a flash flood. Like if it rains a ton and the bean pod gets picked up by like a big flooded river and it gets smashed against the rocks and flipped around, that's another way it'll get scarred. And that is what tells the seed. It's what activates the seed and tells it that it's time to grow. And in the case of the flash flood, it's surrounded by moisture. All the ground's wet, and plants love water, and so they're in a good place. They're set up to start growing in a new location, and they've successfully migrated. Okay, now this isn't technically plant migration, but it's so cool. I just had to include it in the show. Um, these seeds, these are lodgepole pine seeds, are sealed shut with resin and sap. Okay, now the only way you can open that up, besides like a crowbar, which doesn't really exist in nature, the only way to open them up is through burning them. These trees have evolved to need forest fires. Need forest fires to melt the sap that's keeping all the cones closed, melts the sap, it opens them up. That's this picture here. The cone's been burned, the sap's been melted, and it's opened up, and the seeds have dropped out. And now the forest is like completely bare. There's no plants there because forest fire has killed everything. Here's a seed that has all this fertilizer in the form of like burned ground. Burned ground is really good for plants to grow in. It's all this available nutrients and stuff. And here's this seed, boom, drops out of the cone, and it's ready to go. It's just a really cool adaptation that these cones have. They need fire basically, which is kind of a interesting concept, and that's called serotiny. These are serotinous cones. That just means they just need heat to open them up. Not really migration, but super cool. Had to include it. Okie dokie. Here is the Clark's Nutcracker. Another really neat story here. So here's the Clark's Nutcracker right above my head, eating the seeds of a white bark pine tree. Okay, now, and there's a grizzly bear. You can see its little hump on its back. That's how you tell it's a grizzly. Okay, so the grizzly bear, the nutcracker, that bird, and the white bark pine all are from Asia. And they all came over to North America. They all came over to Alaska on this Bering land bridge. Now, this land bridge doesn't exist anymore. It existed during the Ice Age. And that's how like woolly mammoths came from Asia, and all these other critters came from Asia over this land bridge. Back in the day, there was so much ice in the world, these giant ice sheets. The world was covered in ice, or a lot more of the world than is now is covered in ice. And what that meant was that the ocean level was much lower than it is today. All that water that was in the ocean basically was trapped in ice, and that means that the water level was lower. And so that exposed this big piece of land between Asia and North America, and that allowed for animals like grizzly bears just to walk across from Asia into Alaska. And that's how we got grizzly bear in this continent, and a bunch of other animals. And also, that's how we got a bunch of plants. A bunch of plants migrated over that land bridge because animals brought them across that land bridge. And a good example of this is the Clark's Nutcracker, that bird right there. Basically was eating these white bark pine seeds. It was stashing them. It was picking these white bark pine seeds out of the cone, going and stashing them places, either forgetting about them or the bird died or whatever. And those forgotten white bark pine seeds would grow in that new spot that the bird hid them in the first place. And here's a little video of a Clark's Nutcracker gobbling down. It's not really eating them. It's just storing them in its throat. You can see his throat is like super bulgy. Look at its throat. These birds can hold 100 seeds, up to 100 seeds in their throat at one time. So look at, not really eating them, just stashing them in his throat to eat them later. He's basically storing these seeds for the winter. He's going to get a big throat full of them, go fly off, hide them somewhere, and come back and get a whole new bunch of seeds. Do the same thing. And that way it's setting itself up for wintertime. And so a lot of animals do this. A lot of birds do this. Squirrels do it. This pile of pine cones here is a pile that a squirrel made. Cut a bunch of pine cones, made a big stash of them, and all winter long it's going to go back and get one pine cone at a time. And that's going to be his winter food because trees only produce cones one time a year. It's not like all winter long those cones are going to be available. That squirrel had to go and work really hard, cut a bunch of cones out of the tree, go and stash them. And then here, this middle picture, goes and grabs a cone, goes to his favorite little spot, gobbles it up. Little bits of pine cones go everywhere. It makes this giant mess. I'm sure you guys have all seen big piles of this in the woods. And that's where a squirrel's basically like gone and got its cone from its little cache, its little food pantry, gobbled it up, made a big mess, went back and got another cone and did the same thing, and survived the winter by doing that. Now here's an acorn woodpecker. This is another bird that stashes seeds. These are acorns in holes that it's drilled in a tree. So it makes all these holes in this tree, goes and gets acorns and pops them in the hole, and that's what it eats all winter long. Here's a scrub jay. So this is a bird. It's like related to crows and stuff and those nutcrackers. It's got an acorn, stashed it in the ground. Right there. Oh, not quite right. Oh, there we go. There it is. Yep. So it's going to stash it there. It's got hundreds and thousands of little stashed acorns all over the place. And then it's going to come back in the wintertime and eat those acorns up and survive the winter. Okay, here's a quick little vid of this acorn woodpecker.
The woodpecker's safe deposit boxes. Finding the absolutely perfect little vault for every acorn can be quite the puzzle. Each hole has been drilled.
Look
to
at
fit
all
a
those
certain
acorns there. A lot of work. Trying to find just the right spot. Okay, so we're going to take a break from birds, go back to mammals. Really, really big mammals. The giant ground sloth. Too bad this thing's extinct. I would really love to see this thing. So yeah, this is the giant ground sloth, 18 feet tall. 18 feet tall. So that's like, if it stood up, its head would be above the backboard on the basketball hoop in the gym, above the big square that the basketball hoop's attached to. These things are huge. So huge that it could climb, it could get on its hind legs and reach these avocados that were in the tops of these avocado trees. This is a wild avocado tree. And scientists think that if it wasn't for the giant ground sloth, avocados wouldn't exist today. So if you love avocados, thank a giant ground sloth. And basically, the theory is that there was no other animal that could reach, that was big enough to digest the avocado pit, because avocado pits are pretty big enough to digest the avocado pit, or a lot of animals just couldn't even reach it. But the giant ground sloth was so huge, it could reach these avocados, eat them. The animal was so big, it could digest the avocado pit, because that avocado pit needs that scarification. It needs to get all cut up and jostled. Eat that avocado pit, poop it out, all scarred and activated, and sitting in a giant pile of fertilizer. And it grows in a new spot. It migrates. And scientists think that if it wasn't for giant ground sloths, that this tree would have went extinct a long, long time ago. But thankfully, it survived. The giant ground sloth didn't, but we do have three-toed sloths and two-toed sloths, which are relatives of this thing. And so, yeah, that's the story. And I love this picture because it's got these birds flying around on the back of the sloth, eating little bugs and stuff that are living in the sloth's hair. It's just a cool vision of the Ice Age. So if you love avocados, if you love guacamole, thank a sloth. And yeah, there's no giant ground sloths nowadays, but we do have these birds called quetzals, which kind of perform the same function for the avocados. So watch this bird. It's going to puke up an avocado pit here in a second. You can kind of see it's getting ready to barf a little bit. Oh, here it comes. Oh, you see that? Just barfed up an avocado pit. And so, yeah, this quetzal, this bird, is flown up, grabbed an avocado pit, and eaten the whole thing. The pit is sitting in its crop. Birds have this thing called a crop that has, like, birds eat rocks sometimes. And there it was good. Birds eat rocks. The rocks go in this thing called a crop. It's just this little basket in their body. And those rocks are for, like, smashing up the food that sits in their crop and makes it more digestible to them. And so this bird has got this avocado pit, eating it, the the whole thing goes in the crop. The little rocks in the crops like smash it around and jostle it up and make the meat of the avocado more digestible. It also scars up the avocado pit, and then it pukes it up, and the pit's ready to go. It doesn't have the fertilizer like in the sloth poop, but it is all scarred up. It's activated, and it's time to start growing. And that's it. Thanks for watching, wolves. I hope you enjoyed it. Plant migration. And Mr. Bones and I are signing off, saying goodbye. Do your homework. Stay in school. See you guys next time. Oh, sorry, Bones.